Have you ever wondered whether your entire life could be part of a vast, carefully designed program? That everything you see, feel, and believe in is merely a collection of codes and algorithms operating somewhere beyond your perception? Welcome to the reality of the theory that we live in a simulation. This suggestion can evoke a whirlwind of emotions, ranging from genuine curiosity to unbridled fear. Together, we'll take a brief journey through the key arguments that, according to certain researchers and thinkers, support the idea that the world around us is nothing more than a virtual construct, created by someone or something far more advanced than we are. And yes, be prepared that what we're about to discuss here is unlikely to be taught in school. First, let's remember the main point. Our senses and perception of the world depend on the electrical impulses sent to our brain. Our eyes, ears, skin, tongue, and nose are merely sensors of sorts, converting external signals into the electrical activity of nerve cells, while the brain then constructs the image of reality. What if, instead of a real world, we're presented with a digital simulation that simply feeds our brain signals, making us feel that we're living in an actual physical universe? Think of science fiction works, movies in which the heroes unexpectedly discover they're inside a giant computer program. Of course, these are artistic images, but they merely demonstrate how easily our senses can be tricked, given sufficiently advanced technology. One of the most frequently cited proponents of the universe as a simulation idea is philosopher Nick Bostrom, author of a now famous paper in which he posits that if human civilization ever obtains the massive computing resources needed to simulate conscious beings, i.e., us, built into a simulation, it will likely do so on a tremendous scale. His logic is as follows. If we accept that, 1, civilizations can develop highly advanced technologies, 2, they care about modeling past epochs or alternate scenarios, and 3, such high-tech societies don't destroy themselves before achieving this level of advancement, then the number of possible simulated worlds could be colossal, perhaps dwarfing the number of original realities. Therefore, purely by mathematical probability, we are far more likely to be entities in a simulated reality than entities in the original real world. You might ask, what's so special about our world that it might be a simulation? In fact, there are several intriguing signs. For instance, consider the very nature of physical laws. Our universe seems to follow a set of universal rules that show astounding coherence on all levels, from colossal cosmic scales to quantum phenomena. But if this is indeed a computer simulation, then all these laws would be programming code built into the system. In computer games, for example, there's a physics. Objects fall, bounce, and do certain things strictly according to what's laid out in the game's engine. Once the code states that a wall is impassable, the character runs into it and cannot go further. Our universe is, of course, much more complex, but who's to say it couldn't at some point be programmable? Another fascinating domain is quantum mechanics. There we encounter the effects of quantum superposition and wave function collapse, when, to put it simply, a particle can be in multiple states simultaneously and assumes a definite position only when observed. It somehow closely resembles resource optimization in computer systems, where detailed rendering or calculation occurs only when the player points the camera or gaze in that direction. Sound familiar? To save computing power, the program renders the world only at moments when it's needed, and the rest of the time the information is stored in a compressed form. After all, there's no point in constantly reading data about the entire game if the user is only focusing on a small portion of the environment. Similarly, in quantum physics, until observation, you have a set of probabilities and upon measurement, a specific result. If we take the idea of a global programmer seriously, this effect appears to be a logical optimization trick. Moving on to another interesting argument. A computer simulation must be extremely economical in terms of computing resources. This may explain why we have speed limits such as the speed of light, which nothing can surpass. It's quite possible that the speed of light is, in effect, the upper limit of data transmission speed between elements of the system, which cannot be exceeded due to the limitations of the hardware or the code. And constants like Planck's constant, the gravitational constant, and others are programmed parameters that grant stability to our universe. In a good computer model, there must be clearly stated fundamentals so the system doesn't break. Of course, many will ask, where then are the developers of this simulation? After all, we want to know who is observing our world from the outside. Theorists offer all sorts of answers. From advanced civilizations that have reached a technological singularity and for some reason, e.g. for entertainment, scientific interest, historical analysis, decided to recreate previous eras, to the purely abstract concept that we're a self-executing code that was launched at some point and now functions autonomously. Either way, these explanations lie beyond our clear understanding. If we're inside the program, it's logically difficult for us to surface beyond it and see how it all works from the outside. Similarly, a character in a computer game doesn't realize they're part of a virtual world and can't directly touch the player's mouse or keyboard. We should note that certain well-known scientists and science communicators, at least indirectly, have supported this hypothesis. For example, Elon Musk has stated in a few interviews that the chance we're living in base reality is less than 1 in billions. Of course, that's not an academic argument, but it does attract public attention. Nick Bostrom himself has described how the notion of simulating our entire universe could one day evolve from a realm of speculative fiction into a legitimate scientific topic. After all, if today we can run simple virtual worlds, open-world games with rudimentary artificial intelligences, what might these experiments look like in hundreds or thousands of years, when we or our descendants have computational power on an entirely different scale? We also can't ignore the strange coincidences and patterns found in our world which initially appeared devoid of rational explanation. Unusual numerical patterns and fundamental equations, the disproportionately high effectiveness of mathematics in describing reality, certain synchronicities in events. All these are sometimes viewed as glitches or Easter eggs in the system. Naturally, such arguments are not genuine scientific proof, but when discussing simulation theory, they're often cited to add a mystical flavor to the overall context. After all, when something functions too perfectly or bizarrely malfunctions, one might suspect some underlying code behind it. This idea harks back to a rather ancient philosophical tradition. Take, for instance, Plato's cave. Though Plato had no knowledge of computers, he spoke of people as prisoners, seeing only shadows on the wall and taking them for reality. Only a few managed to escape and see that the source of these shadows is something entirely different. Essentially, his allegory already contains the notion of how limited our perception is, how we cannot peek beyond the boundaries of familiar phenomena. And if we expand this idea, it's easy to imagine that physical reality itself is the shadows, projections of a higher level of reality. Or in modern terminology, merely an interface by which we interact with the code hidden behind the veil of matter. One frequently cited counterargument against the simulation hypothesis is the issue of the enormous amount of energy and resources needed to simulate our vast universe. The immense expanse, billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. And that's just the observable portion. How could any super-powerful future machine ever compute that? However, simulation theorists respond, why are you so sure that this entire boundless universe genuinely exists in detail all at once? Perhaps, as mentioned earlier, it operates on a principle of lazy loading, where planets, stars, and galaxies are only rendered in detail when we observe them through telescopes. At other times, the universe may function in a lower resolution, more generalized state. And given the difficulty of direct observation of objects at cosmic scales, the simulation doesn't need to load every detail at once. This notion aligns with quantum mechanics, where objects can exist in probabilistic states and materialize into specific positions upon observation. Another potential evidence for the simulation theory lies in the striking developments in AI and virtual technologies already taking place in our 21st century. We're creating virtual worlds from scratch, designing landscapes, scripting physics for games, and populating these worlds with NPCs, non-player characters capable of reacting to player actions. When you think about it, these are still very rudimentary experiments compared to what might exist in centuries. Imagine that in the future we can craft virtual worlds whose inhabitants possess full self-awareness. We intricately script their history and impose natural limits, giving them the illusion that their world is the only reality. Thus, even without much imagination, it becomes plausible that our own world might be the result of a similar experiment. And why should we doubt it if science and technology are moving in directions that suggest creating a realistic simulation is not only possible but could become quite an ordinary task in the future? Yet how well does this hypothesis hold up under the scrutiny of common sense and scientific methodology? Skeptics assert that speaking of a simulation entails assuming the existence of the universe plus one, a higher level we can't verify or study. The scientific method, grounded in observation, experimentation, and reproducibility, demands proof we simply can't obtain if we're inside the proposed system. If its laws obey some meta-rules, we likely can't test them experimentally. Moreover, the concept of the world's virtuality or unreality is, to a large degree, pointless for everyday life because we still live here, experience pain and pleasure, emotions, go about our work, and raise children. That means for us as game characters, there's no difference between a real universe and an enormous computer experiment. We're tied to our experiences, which means that from the perspective of our existence, hardly anything changes, even if it turns out that all of physics is merely an algorithm. Another controversial point is that people who reference the simulation theory in everyday discussions might use it as justification or a pretext for a certain fatalism. If we're merely digital characters, do we truly have free will? Or are all our paths pre-programmed by an external entity? Then even our mistakes are just lines of code. But the philosophical challenge of free will has existed for thousands of years and didn't originate with the simulation concept. Materialists and determinists have long argued that if the brain is governed by physical laws, free will is an illusion, and we are just executing nature's program. Others have maintained that humanity can step outside causal chains. So the free will question remains basically what it was, even before we started contemplating virtual reality. What are we to do with all this? Should we continue searching for proof that everything around us is a simulation? Try to hack the code, spot some glitch in the system somewhere, or conversely treat discussions of simulations as mere entertainment without practical value? Perhaps the answer depends on your own curiosity and your approach to the philosophical issues of existence and knowledge. Some people love these paradoxical hypotheses. They enjoy feeling like pioneers in a new concept of the universe. Others prefer to steer clear of anything that isn't backed by fundamental empirical data, dismissing it as too much like science fiction. Regardless, the concept of living in a simulation continues to capture the imagination, draw media attention, and compel us to reflect on the possibility that there is still much we don't know about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. But what if we do try to imagine the outcome of suddenly discovering conclusively and indisputably that we live in a simulation? For some, it might be the most radical revolution in consciousness, comparable to realizing that Earth isn't the center of the universe, or that species evolve rather than remain unchanged since creation. Perhaps vast groups of people would begin seeking ways to exit the simulation, attempting to contact the outside operators. Some religious perspectives might take new forms in which God is an advanced civilization of programmers, and sacred texts turn out to be programming documentation. For some, this news would be no surprise at all. I've always suspected reality is an illusion. For others, it could unleash existential dread. If everything is a simulation, what's the point of trying? Why advance culture, science, or create art? But again, our experiences would remain as they are, and the world we see would not change simply because we label it real or virtual. We would still feel pain, joy, fear, and love driving us to value life. Nevertheless, we should remember that the school curriculum typically deals with widely accepted scientific theories, from Newtonian mechanics to modern cosmology. Presenting simulation as a universally recognized fact would be an overreach, as it's a hypothesis that, although popular, lacks strict empirical confirmation. Schools often don't delve into such bold concepts because their aim is to provide a foundational education, not philosophical speculation. However, in today's information age, where a single click can bring up millions of articles and videos on the question, "Are we living in the Matrix?" more and more people are discovering these ideas on their own. Perhaps it's worth at least being aware of these concepts and understanding why they are intriguing and have so many supporters. Ultimately, the question, "Are you living in a simulation?" isn't just an intriguing premise for science fiction novels and movies. It's also a genuine invitation to deeply examine what we call reality and consciousness. The simulation hypothesis presents us with an expansive thought experiment. We learn to doubt the obvious and to consider the limitations of our senses and intellect. Perhaps we won't discover the true nature of being for a long time, or perhaps some curious breakthroughs in the near future will steer us toward sensational conclusions. Regardless, this theory can fire the imagination, spark critical thinking, and give us the sense that something incredible might lurk just beyond the veil of our ordinary world. And that is, arguably, its greatest value. A reminder that our path to understanding is boundless, and what seems like fantasy today could become a scientific fact tomorrow, or at the very least a topic of serious discussion. After all, there was a time when mobile phones and space travel were the stuff of fiction. Yet now they're part of our everyday reality. Why shouldn't an even more monumental breakthrough in understanding the nature of existence become the next step? And if one day we really do get to the bottom of things and uncover the proof that they'll never teach us in school, well, it would undoubtedly be the greatest shift in our worldview, after which it would be impossible to see life the same way again.